Plato argues that since philosophers have an insight into forms or reality, they should be the rulers of a state, or that alternatively, rulers should become philosophers. Bertrand Russell looks from a different perspective the problem of continuous change in nature which bothered Greek philosophers. They felt that it prevents men from gaining certain knowledge. According to Russell, the problem which puzzled the Greek philosophers relates to universals or general terms used in language. Examples of general terms are roses, tables, chairs, and the like. In modern language, these terms are concepts and the objects which fall within the definition of any concept are assigned to it. There may be any number of instances of the concept rose. Some philosophers believe that there is a form or essence underlying all such instances of a concept. They are called realists. Their opponents are normalists who argue that one need not look beyond the individual instances of rose. Idea of good. After this brief outline of the theory of forms, we turn to Plato's moral ideas. For Plato, the good has unconditional worth and is the source of worth in various things. He gives a sublime philosophical definitions of the good. It is the ultimate ground at the same time of knowing and of being, of the perceiver and the perceived, of the subject and the objective, of the ideal and the real. Though exalted itself above such a division, Plato regarded the idea of the good and God is as identical. Plato considered the good from three sides. First, he considered the good as idea or good in itself as mentioned above. In this aspect, it is distinct from its manifestations in science, truth, beauty, and virtue. Secondly, he considers the good as individual virtue. Thirdly, he regards the good as ethical world in the political state. We will shortly consider the constitution which Plato outlines in the Republic. Any discussion of the highest good has to consider the conception of pleasure. The doctrine of hedonism proposed that pleasure is the true good. Plato rejects hedonism because pleasures are intermediate and relative. For the pursuit of a pure pleasures often results in pain and misery. Plato, however, admits pleasure as an ingredient of the good by showing the necessary connection between virtue and true pleasure. True and enduring pleasure is found in the exercise of reasons and in the possessions of truth and goodness. Good life is virtuous life, largely made up of intellectual studies and rational action, accompanied by some pure ascetic pleasures. Plato's conception of pleasure is thus spiritual and intellectual. Theory of virtue. Plato's theory of virtue follows the Socratic doctrine. He identifies virtue with knowledge. From this, it follows that virtue is teachable and that man can learn morality just as they can learn any other subject. Morality is not an innate quality or a contingent gift of nature. Moral beings are not born but made through education. Plato makes a fourfold division of morals and associates them with different parts of the soul. The four virtues are wisdom or prudence, valor, temperance, and justice. Plato regards the virtues as forming a complex unity. The one can be manifold or the manifold one. This may seem like philosophical word play, but implies that virtues share common features and look similar from several perspectives. Plato accords a privileged position to justice as the overarching virtue. Plato divides the soul into three parts: rational, spirited, and appetitive. Wisdom or prudence is virtue of reason, the first part of the soul. Wisdom is the directing or measuring virtue. For instance, without it, courage will become a rash impulse, and quiet endurance will degenerate into stony indifference. Valor is the virtue of spirit, the second part of the soul. Valor preserves the rational intelligence which is often beset with anxieties in its struggle against pain and pleasure, desire and fear. The third part of the soul consists of biological appetites. It is necessary to control their propensity towards excess. Temperance regulates human passions and signifies the submission of non rational elements to reason. Justice refers to the harmonious functioning of the related elements of the soul, the appetitive, the spirited, and the rational. Justice in Plato's sense makes an individual concentrate on his duties. It can be thought of as the sense of duty. As we shall see in the ideal commonwealth of Plato, every citizen will perform his assigned duties without craving for the more attractive or powerful roles of others. Plato's Republic. As mentioned earlier, Plato considered that individual virtue is possible only for citizens of a moral state. Plato's dialogue, Republic, is a vision of such an ideal political society or commonwealth. It is the earliest political utopia. Plato proposes a constitution in which philosophers will be the kings or rulers. He holds that until philosophers are made kings or kings or princes acquire philosophical wisdom, no solutions can be found for the political ills of states. Prima facie, Plato's suggestion of handing over state power to speculative philosophers sounds strange. Political thinkers have identified the reasons which led Plato to his vision of the ideal commonwealth. He was reacting against the troubled political conditions in Athens after its defeat in the Peloponnesian War. In modern terminology, Athens then was a failed state. The capital penalty imposed on Socrates would have exacerbated Plato's dislike for democracy, which had then degenerated into mob rule. Being an aristocrat, Plato had a natural antipathy towards democracy. Most importantly, Plato was impressed by the myth of Sparta. Sparta was a military autocracy controlled by an oligarchy. Plutarch, in his Life of Lycurgus, gave a glowing, romantic, and fictional account of the Spartan state and created the myth of Sparta, which impressed Plato. The Republic contains many features of the Spartan state which Plutarch narrated. The citizens of the Republic are to be divided into three classes: the common people, the soldiers, and the guardians. Only the guardians are to exercise political power. The legislator or the author of the constitution will select the first group of guardians. Afterward, the guardians will succeed by hereditary. The main problem is to ensure that guardians will follow the intentions of the legislator. To secure this end, Plato proposes a series of political, economic, educational, and other measures. As acquisitive instincts and family ties lead to corruption, the republic will have neither private property nor the family system. There will be community living and common eating. Women and children will be commonly shared. Children will be taken away from parents at a set time and will be raised by the state. Weak and informed children will be exposed to death at birth. Plato gives extensive details about the proper type of education. Education will consist of culture and athletics, gymnastics. There will be austere training of the body. Both boys and girls will participate in physical training. Girls will also be trained in all military arts and will be conditioned to be brave. The education will inculcate gravity, decorum, and courage. The education, it is evident, is a form of rigorous military training. Plato proposes strict censorship over literature, drama, and music. Even Homer, who attributes immoral behavior to gods, is to be banned. Tragic dramas with their pathos, which may undermine courage and military virtue, are to be banned. Cheap comedy, pantomime, and buffoonery will find no place in the Republic. Plato is severe on poets too. Military music, which serves to embolden soldiers and the general populace, will be encouraged. Plato doubts whether people will readily accept his proposed state. He hopes that people can be convinced through one royal lie. It will consist in propounding and propagating the myth that God has created men of three kinds: rulers, guardians, military class, and the common citizen. If people accept the inequalities and the class system as part of a divinely ordained order, there will be no dissatisfaction or social unrest. The republic will enjoy political stability. Plato explains his second conception of justice after describing the three classes of the ideal commonwealth. The wisdom of the state resides in the small class of guardians. The courage of the state in the auxiliaries and the temperance of the state in the subordination of the governed to the governing. The justice of the state consists in that everyone attends to his business without interfering with anyone else. The individual is just when all the parts of his soul function harmoniously with the due subordination of lower parts to the higher parts. Similarly, the state is just when all its classes and their individual members perform their due functions diligently. Political injustice, on the other hand, exists in a meddlesome and restless spirit, which leads to one class interfering with the business of the other. As Bertrand Russell observes humorously, that everyone should mind his own business in an admirable dictum, but it hardly fits into modern concept of justice based on equity, impartiality, and fair play. Criticisms of Platonic ideas. For many centuries, philosophers lavished fulsome praise on Plato's Republic. It was seen as an odyssey of the free intellect, a sublime expression of political ideals freed from narrow personal interests of the individual. Although the then Athenian state was in utter moral decline, Plato seemed to have expressed its form or its true but deeply buried, buried moral foundations. It was recognized that the political institutions of the republic subordinate the individual to the political society, but it was considered a necessary corrective to unchecked individual licentiousness. The violations of the individual and requirements of state power have to be reconciled to ensure political stability. In modern times, political thinkers have attacked Plato's ideas. They are seen as offensive to the modern democratic tempo. Bertrand Russell stresses the ancestry of fascism to Plato. Karl Popper includes Plato among the three great intellectual enemies of open society, the other two being Hegel and Marx. Open society, according to Popper, is representative democracy with a full panoply of individual freedoms. We may note the main charges which modern writers level against Plato. In spite of Plato's fine talk, his republic is a hereditary military oligarchy. It is essentially based not on democratic but on aristocratic principles. Political power rests with the guardians. A large section of the population, farmers, artisans, and traders, will be permanently excluded from political power. This will be a permanent dispensation with no possibility of change. Plato's republic seems to reflect his subconscious aristocratic wish that the democratic tendencies should be stifled. It may appear that the republic will be ruled by saintly guardians embodied, imbued with Platonic ideals. As ideals represent impersonal ethics, there may seem no great objection to rule of the enlightened philosophers. It may seem preferable to the messy democratic system often driven by venal greed and power lust of politics. The difficulty is that there may be no unanimity, unanimity or consensus on even the most enlightened ideology. Ideology expresses the desires, hopes, and the world view of a social group. There can be conflicting ideologies. The second half of the 20th century is a tale of the conflict between Western capitalism and communism. There can be clash on morality, for instance, as between that of a Christian saint and of Nazi Superman. Idols cannot be often disassociated from the class, status, or nation of an individual. The ideology of the guardians will have no relation to popular desires or hopes. At best, guardians will implement Plato's ideals. Plato's concept of justice, unlike modern democratic theory, has no connection with equality. Justice implies that citizens accept their status as guardians, soldiers, farmers, artisans, or traders, and perform their assigned roles. This conception allows inequalities of power and privileges to exist without the injustice. Plato sees no injustice in the rule of hereditary guardians since they are best fitted to rule because of their knowledge and training. Plato's view on this question is misconceived. In society, certain occupations like those of doctors, lawyers, navigators, and accountants require acquisitions of professional skills, but those who seek political office need no such qualification. The common denominator of citizenship is sufficient for aspiring political leaders. Plato's view in this matter rests on a false analogy. Plato argues that the guardian possesses the knowledge of moral ideas of the abstract realm. Leaving aside the question whether such an ideal realm in fact exists, we need to note another difficulty with Plato's conception. Plato and for a long time many philosophers mixed up factual statements and moral judgments. Factual statements are verifiable and objective. They are about events or features of the world whose veracity can be directly or indirectly checked. For example, experimental data are statements of fact. Knowledge of the physics world largely consists of factual statements of science. Moral judgments and theories with which Plato is concerned are distinct from facts. We will discuss the nature of moral judgments later, but it is easy to see that morals are not directly linked to an objective external reality. They are essentially about desirable human conduct and ways of living. While there can be agreement in principle about facts exist true or false, it is not so with morals. As we have noted, people disagree about morals which ultimately depend on one's ideals, preferences, and ends. In a sense, morals cannot be equated with knowledge. In modern terminology, one has to distinguish between judgments of facts and judgments of value. Agreement on facts rests on standard verification procedures. Moral agreements are matters of consensus. We may note a few more unattractive features of Plato's Republic. It smacks of totalitarian and autocratic rule. Plato is ready to use the royal light to deceive the gullible population. He introduces censorship, which is against the principle of liberty. His proposals for abolishing family system are weird. He virtually abolishes the private moral space of the individual. He experiences his activities and pleasures not as an autonomous individual but as a part of the social organism. He is submerged in the state. As we noted earlier, Plato's views on virtue are derived from Socrates. He places them within the framework of his theory of forms. As a result, he injects an air of mysticism into them. Plato conceives an individual's moral life as dependent on the ethical constitution of the state. Hence, any discussion of Platonic virtue cannot be separated from political ethics. Plato is generally seen more as a political thinker than as a moralist. His ideal political commonwealth is an outgrowth of his disenchantment with democracy and common populace, the great unwashed in the words of a political philosopher, and his desire to ensure the continued existence of an aristocratic state. Notwithstanding the glittering phrases he uses, his ideal commonwealth is essentially a closed military aristocratic oligarchy. It contains features characteristic of modern dictatorships. As such, the Platonic political temper runs counter to modern liberal political thought. However, his account of individual virtue is still an inspiring ideal. Summary of Plato's philosophy. Plato's philosophical outlook was greatly influenced by the defeat of Athens in the Peloponnesian War and the death sentence on Socrates. His views became anti democratic. Plato regards the external world as given in senses as only an appearance. The real world is an abstract realm of eternal and unchanging ideas or forms. Plato calls the forms as archetypes and the objects of the material world as their copies or adumbrations. For Plato, the goods has unconditional worth and is the source of worth in various things. Plato rejects hedonism because pleasures are indeterminate and relative. Plato makes a fourfold division of morals and associates them with different parts of the soul. The four virtues are wisdom or prudence, valor, temperance, and justice. Plato divides soul into three parts as rational, spirited, and appetitive. He associates different virtues with each part of the soul. He injects an air of mysticism into moral discussions. Justice refers to the harmonious functioning of the related elements of the soul, the appetitive, the spirited, and the rational. Plato's dialogue. The Republic is a vision of an ideal political society or commonwealth. It is the earliest political utopia. Plato proposes a constitution in which philosophers will be the kings or rulers. Plutarch, in his life of Lycurgus, gave a glowing, romantic, and fictional account of the Spartan state and created the myth of Sparta, which impressed Plato. Sparta was a military dictatorship. The citizens of the republic are to be divided into three classes: the common people, the soldiers, and the guardians. Only the guardians are to exercise political power. The republic will have neither private property nor family system. Guardians will be hereditary and will be educated with rigid discipline for instilling in them military skills and culture. Plato proposes strict censorship of literature, drama, and music. His republic is a hereditary military oligarchy. It smacks of totalitarian and autocratic rule. In it, the individual will be submerged in the state. In modern times, political thinkers have attacked Plato's ideas. They are seen as offense to the modern democratic temper. Bertrand Russell stresses the ancestry of Fascism to Plato. Karl Popper includes Plato among the three great intellectual enemies of open society. The other two being Hegel and Marx. The ideology of the Guardians will have no relation to popular desires or hopes. At best, Guardians will implement Plato's ideals. The individual is submerged in the state. Thank you.